When she celebrates,
Well, welcome to the 10th Alpha Beta Talk, brought to you by Alpha Collective. Alpha Collective is a professional organization, it may not seem so at the moment, focused on Web3, ancillary and intersecting focus areas like AI, trust, community, and whatever comes next. Think YPO meets the Illuminati. Our vision is to usher in the era of community capitalism. Our mission is to help onboard the next billion wallets via the next billion brand dollars. In season 1, we will roll out IRL events, monthly vertical masterminds, weekday virtual coffees in our collective cafe, and our flagship product, 52 Alpha Talks delivered by 52 Alpha Talk speakers, 26 male and 26 female, for those who identify as such, 0 clowns. But to get the ball rolling, we're proud to share 13 additional rock stars who will deliver 13 Alpha Beta Talks over the next 15 weeks. They are free as part of a preview period, but from Labor Day, they'll be for members only. You can purchase your membership pass via credit card at alphacollective.xyz or, while stocks last, crypto at mint.alphacollective.xyz. And just before we bring on our 10th Alpha Beta Talk speaker, here's a small clip and highlight from our 9th talk delivered by Chiron.
Once information becomes transparent, a lot can happen.
It's really, really scary when you realize that the emperor has no clothes. When actually the things we say, our bravado, our pretense, can actually be proven or refuted in terms of whether it's how much money we made. We're seeing it now with X, in terms of people being able to be, people showing and sharing and saying, this is how much money I made. Because also, if you don't disclose it and you say one thing and it ends up being another thing, you can be taken to task. So even though that's not necessarily an on-chain event, it's going to be. And I think this must be scary for the big brands, for the corporate world, because they've traded on buying Super Bowl spots or big reach events. But we don't know how many people actually watched. We don't know whether they in fact got return on their investment, how much wastage was built. And when all the wastage is built, if you're the board, if you're the chairman of the board, if you're the CEO, and you see your chief marketing officer literally flushing millions of dollars down the toilet, they're probably not going to keep their job for very long. That's almost an inevitability. You can run, but you can't hide. So you may as well get ahead of it now before it comes back to bite you in the butt.
The world runs on the stories we want to tell, not really on the facts. At the same time, and I'm sorry for bringing ChatGPT so much into this, but it is the example of the day. The same way we are adapting to it and learning to use that, okay, maybe now a lot of things, operational things, don't require authorship, is the way I would describe it. Like, you don't need someone to write a contract every single time. Maybe that CMO could just be a dashboard. And yeah, sadly, it could mean that CMO loses their job.
That was a money shot and a flippin' body blow. CMO as a dashboard. Those were fighting words. But now it's time to take the fight to my partner in crime today, Mr. Greg Verdino. Greg is a leading authority on marketing transformation. His career as a marketing innovator includes agency side stints at Crayon, heard of them, Digitus, never heard of them, Wonderman and Saatchi, along with CMO and CRO roles at several technology startups. Greg is the author of Joseph Jaffe's favorite book. Damn, why am I reading this? Micro Marketing: Get Big Results by Thinking and Acting Small, and the co-host of No Brainer, an AI podcast for marketers. In 2011, he founded Verdino, a B2B brand strategy and content marketing agency. And I can attest to the stellar work that he and his partner in crime have been putting out consistently. Earlier this year, he launched Cognitive Path to help brands tap into the potential of generative AI to enhance productivity, unleash creativity, improve performance, and create strategic advantage. It's time for the reunion. Greg Verdino, welcome back. And I've got special music for you, my friend.
Do you?
So, welcome to Clown Town.
Hello, my friend. This is you're upping the standard, I think, of the professional aura you wish to purvey.
I'm trying and dragging us down. Look, I went to attempt to Midjourney to find. You're better on that side. To find some images of Clown Town, and this is what came up. Apparently, so I went and I prompted again, and I said, could we have maybe less scary and more goofier clowns? And this is what came up. Still very, very scary. And so you know that I had to turn us both into clowns. You ended up a little bit better than I did. This was me.
It's a good likeness.
And that was you. For some reason, AI does not recognize that you can even remotely be funny or like a clown. So this was the most face paint that I could get for you.
That's a pretty sad clown.
Anyway, enough about clowns. Actually, not about clowns. Let's see who is watching at the moment. Jensa is here. Chris Martins is here. Anne Marie Almore is here. And Michael Donnelly is here as well.
Holy.
Michael is going to get a mention at some point. You can believe that. I mean, if we're doing some OG stuff, then it's going to be a lot of show and tell. We're going to be showing
your
books.
Your favorite book. I like it.
The Light, It Blinds Me. And no doubt there will be some Second Life references as well. But Greg, let's get into the subject at hand. You wanted a fireside chat. You got a fireside chat, which only makes me think that you were just too lazy to put a presentation together.
That's about right. That's about right.
But let's start off with this idea of Clown Town. Welcome to Clown Town. It just feels like the right way to describe Web3. But it begs the question, who are the clowns? Are the clowns the people that are actually on screen right now? Are the clowns the degens? Are the clowns the normies? Are the clowns the marketers? Are we all just part of the circus? I would love to hear your take on it.
I think it's fair to say we're all part of the circus, and I think your maybe Midjourney was kind of on the ball more than you realized they were by making the circus, kind of this like scary clown village, right? Because it's funny, but it is also scary, right? I think you had you're getting a fax, Joe. You got a fax behind you. Because you've got the builders, to a large extent, kind of. I'm trying to think of how to frame it. I'm going to back it up a step. I think, like, I want to believe, right? I want to believe in the vision that Web3 presents, but in practice, I think the challenge is that you have a lot of builders building kind of where Web3 becomes a problem in search of a solution, right? There's not a clear use case. The utility behind a project is ill defined. They're marketing their projects using these kind of played out, kind of dried up playbooks, all like the hype, the Lambo, the when moon, that kind of stuff. That's almost a laughable, almost a caricature of what marketing could be or should be. At the same time, you've got brands running in and out, right? So obviously Web3 was hot for big brands for about one hot minute. And as soon as the hype died, the brands ran away and they reprioritized and they deprioritized and they moved all of their energy and their effort into other things. People who were heads of Web3 or heads of metaverse became heads of artificial intelligence. And the switch happened overnight. So you've got all of these weird kind of hits and misses. And all the while, nobody, for the most part, acknowledging the fact that we've done this before, we've been there before, we've made the same mistakes before, and we haven't actually learned the lessons. And I think, to me, that's where it becomes, in a way, laughable, but also frightening, and a scenario in which we're really squandering the kind of opportunity we could have by kind of being, frankly, stupid about it.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad you touched on that idea of clowns are scary, and they're not cute, and they're not necessarily, or at least we might think as adults, as mature adults, that our kids love the clowns, but the reality is that it's like a Stephen King novel, and it seemed like a horror movie at the best of times. But I wonder, even if we go back to the .com and the digital days. I mean, look, I mean, I told you there are props everywhere. This is scary. This sock puppet is scary. You know, have you ever like been in bed and had the sock puppet coming for you? I mean,
I
it
have
it,
not, Joe. I have
it was
not had that happen.
it was scary. I mean, the whole .com period of time was scary too. There was a lot of money being made. There was a lot of money being lost. There was a lot of what do they call it? Irrational exuberance, and then everything just goes to hell in a handbasket, and then the phoenix rises from the ashes. I've been
So I would even go back a step further, right? Because the initial sort of vision for an iteration of the web was very much about democratization, was very much about community. It was not a place for the normies, right? I'm talking like back in the day, like Are You Serious and Jaron Lanier and Douglas Copeland, right? And Doug Rushkoff and like all those people, right? They were, in these kind of niche communities. It was very counterculture, very alt culture, very cyberpunk. It actually, to that community of people who built the web, the commercialization of the web was in many ways the beginning of the end of the internet. And we've seen that cycle repeat over and over and over again. So it's not even just the dot-com boom and bust. To the people who built the web in the first place and saw it as this wild, democratized, countercultural movement, saw the commercialization of the web in the first place as the beginning of the problem. And that's when we started this cycle, this sort of peaks and valleys cycle of counterculture gets commercialized, commercialization becomes this huge boom, and then the boom busts. Right. And then from the ashes of Web 1.0, we got Web 2.0. Same exact thing. Remember the early days of Web 2.0, where it was democratized, it was counterculture, it was it was not about commercial, but it was also incredibly difficult, right? Any of us could launch a blog, any of us could be experts, could be photographers, personal brands, whatever it happened to be. But it required you to have, your blog on Typepad and your photos on Flickr, and you were on MySpace and Classmates and maybe Facebook and Friendster. You were having conversations on Dig. You were sharing links on Reddit, right? It was like this really messy thing. And in a lot of ways, it was the consolidation that made it viable for the masses. And whether that's good or bad, you can argue, but it was the fact that you had a Facebook, for example, come along, centralize all of this stuff. And if you're a Midwestern mom or dad, you no longer had to have 14 different social presences that were all they were democratized, they were distributed, but they were also highly fragmented. Right now, you had one place to go to connect with your friends, to publish your crap, to put your photos, to talk about your kids, and all this stuff all in one place, which of course gave the brands the scale that they look for. Because let's be honest, and I've been a marketer for 30 years, you've been a marketer for 30 years, we are fundamentally lazy, right? We don't want to have to do the hard things it takes to build community organically, to engage with people across all of these different touch points. We want that Super Bowl spot because it's not feasible for us to manage all of the complexity all the time, every single day. It's really difficult for marketers to do that, especially when there's so much pressure on them to deliver results today.
I I have a I have a pushback on that, but before I get there, a friendly pushback. Before I get there, I was thinking as you were telling that story, and we debated what we wanted to call this before we came to Clowntown, and one of the things was basically this idea that marketers just everything up, and in many respects, that's what I was thinking in my mind. But I was thinking very astute point that the commercialization of the internet was, or digital was, the beginning of the end. Just today or yesterday, I think we saw Twitter/X say that they were sunsetting promoted accounts, or one aspect of the ad revenue model. The reality is we've been living through this other kind of Groundhog Day, which is get big fast and then monetize through ads, advertising, interruptive type of poorly targeted, underwhelming messaging. And it does make me think back to Second Life. It does make me think back to what happened when the brands came in and got pelted with genitalia, flying genitalia, because the equivalent of the
Yeah.
degens were of the were basically saying, don't come in here and pollute our environment. And they weren't saying we're waiting for you to clean up Times Square. They weren't saying we're waiting for you to come in with your brand, your billion brand dollars, which is the mission of Alpha Collective. They were saying we're actually just happy hanging out here and connecting with one another. And if you want to be a part of this, and if you want to join us, you're kind of going to need to prove that you're here for the right reasons and or can make our lives better. No?
Right. And that you are willing to respect the norms of the community that we've built, right? Don't come in, you're not the conquistadors, right? Don't come in and or even, I guess maybe even before the conquistadors, the missionaries, right? Don't come in and try to sell us your religion. And then, on the back of that, when we've converted and we believe in you, come in and kind of pelt us over the head. And that's effectively what we saw a lot of brands do. Not all brands, and I know you said Michael Donnelly is going to get a mention or two, I'm sure, in this conversation. But there are some brands who made a significant and substantial effort to engage the community on the community's terms, respect what the community was all about, engage with what in Second Life were the equivalent of the builders, right? The people who were creating experiences, and building, frankly, businesses in some cases on the backs of those experiences, selling to one another in world, that kind of stuff. When a brand came in and respected, I think, those norms and those sort of those sort of for lack of a better term, rules of the community, rules of the road, it was much more likely that those brands would be accepted to one
It,
degree or another, right?
it really was. It really was a microcosm for Web3 within this world. And look, Michael Donnelly was our client at Coca-Cola. We worked on a program called Virtual Thirst. He hired Crayon, our agency, our boutique. I still have, by the way, props everywhere. He has little Devo Dapto making a bit of an appearance with his washboard abs. But the reality is we did exactly what you what you just advocated. We were builders. We were members. We had a presence. We worked with the community. It's not like we were that smart or that original or that awesome. This was just fundamentally, this was almost like the golden rule. This was just get to know the neighbors, get to know, the local inhabitants, instead of coming and marauding and looting and pillaging, and coming with the arrogance, expecting to know more, know better, and be better and do better, as in you're better off with us than without us. That is a false assumption. And ultimately, Greg, that's what we did. We went and we worked. I can't recall. Did we ever get any pushback? Did we ever get any local inhabitants pelting us with genitalia?
We didn't get that. What we did get was we had there were some criticisms from some members of Second Life around things like the, quite frankly, stinginess of the prize originally. But we worked with the client to address it proactively. There were some concerns around the use of intellectual property in the world, which again Coca-Cola addressed at the time in terms of releasing certain rights that allowed members, creators to use Coca-Cola trademarks in world for certain purposes. So the pushback we got, what we responded, or more precisely, the client responded to that pushback. And proved that they were listening. And to your point, that wasn't rocket science. That was the same thing that any brand would have and should have learned from plain old vanilla social media, right? We had already been through that cycle where brands came into social media thinking it was just another place to broadcast one way messages, and learned very quickly that the most powerful use cases were not reach and frequency and the ability to deliver brand communications. It was the ability, to have conversation. And Anne Marie, who also, I feel like this is like a Crayon Second Life reunion, where we've got the client, we've got the prize winner, we've got us sitting in the middle. But Anne Marie, who actually won the competition, said she felt the prize was fair, and in the end, the prize was absolutely very fair. There was a point, I think, early in the competition where there was not. I think it was just a sort of an experiential prize to go work with millions of us to make your concept a reality. But I think there was some criticism that there weren't some lindens attached to that.
And Greg, and
we
here
did
we
add on.
are, and here we are, all these years later, 17 years later, still talking about it, still talking about whether you want to call that earned media, or just the fact that this is an idea that wasn't there
We're like
someone who once said marketing is not a campaign, it's a commitment. But I mean,
we're like the Al Bundys of digital marketing.
I mean, I'll tell you, Anne Marie did say this, and it's true. She said, "I remember my clients feeling Web 2 wouldn't last. Same for Web 3. They just haven't figured out how to monetize appropriately and stop treating them like consumers and start treating them like part of the brand." I do want to just show this and then go back to that pushback. I don't know if you can see it, if you can see it, Greg. But I really I really laughed at this. About famous blogger sucked into Second Life disappears. I have to look carefully. It says, "We're devastated," said Greg Verdino, 40-something-year-old Cranista. You wish. enjoying his third breakfast. But I like this one, which is 1 minute my avatar was insulting his avatar, and then the real Jaffe showed up on my computer screen. Not much has changed, my friend. Not much has changed.
And
So,
not much has changed even today.
okay,
And
so
I think Anne Marie is really speaking to something that is an important point, right? It's this idea of the changing relationship between the company and the customer, and
right.
I think it's almost like once a decade or however frequently it is, that notion bubbles up, right? And it becomes part of a hype cycle connected to a shift in either our media channels or in our technologies or whatever. And this idea of, oh, well, wait a second, this is a transformative moment when companies and customers now have an entirely new basis for creating value for one another. And everyone gets really excited about it. But the brands don't have the staying power. They don't have the longevity. They don't have the patience to wait until that actually begins to pay out. And that's where we get into trouble because something that might have a lot of potential and present a lot of opportunity kind of fizzles out before it even has a chance to become everything it could be. And that's where we were, back in the days of Second Life, right? When Second Life was hot, 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 and then one negative article, and effectively the whole thing fell apart. And right, exactly.
That's the
And
article.
right. And then, and the same thing has happened with Web3, right? Where it was all hype, 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 hot, 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 and then you had a whole series of things happen, including the whole SBF debacle or SFB, whatever the hell his name is, Sam Bankman-Fried debacle, and all the other things that happened, where all of a sudden Web3 wasn't a thing anymore, or metaverse was a thing for a minute and then not a thing anymore, and now we're on to artificial intelligence, and that has legs in a different way because it's not a thing; it's kind of a horizontal that gets embedded into everything. But we're already starting to see generative AI backlash, right? So these, we get into these hype cycles and brands get excited and they allocate some money. And then as soon as the hype fades, they lose their fortitude. And, that's one of the big challenges is how does a brand, kind of have the fortitude and the patience and the bravery to stick out the hype cycles and actually do something that they feel is right, right? Assuming they ever do feel it's right. I mean, many are
Well,
probably just jumping on the hype.
Well, I want to, it's funny. Michael said, "Oh, you had to show that article," but the reality is that someone like Michael, who now is at the ANA representing, gajillions of brand dollars, Michael, you could probably count him on one hand in terms of a brand, a marketer that pioneered and can actually look back, not as in. What an embarrassment, what a stain, how could I have done that? He can actually look back saying, actually, can you imagine what would have happened had we all stayed the course, had we not been bullied by the false prophets and the lazy journalists? And you go back to this idea of I had Khusro Khalid on the show, and we're talking about these estimates, these metaverse estimates. For, this was from Tom Goodwin, kind of snarkily, kind of pushing back, and I was like, that may be so, but even looking at Deloitte, that's 2035. We're in 2023. In 2019, we didn't really know what was going to happen in March of 2020. So you have this, and then something else I've referenced as well is the realistic Web3 glossary that just again snarkily just talks down and criticizes and critiques in the meanest, most nastiest way of being able to look at something new, unproven, nascent, and judges it. And so, Greg, I guess my question for you, that I said I was going to push back, is it that marketers are lazy, or in fact, is it just that marketers do not have the tools, the means, the resources, the talent, the partners, and which you've already alluded to, this staying power, the ability to see something through years after that marketer rotates to a different division or different department or different geography or leaves the company together. Is that the problem, or is
Yeah.
it, or as opposed to the
Yeah, I mean,
easy answer, which is
yeah,
laziness?
laziness was a bit flip, and I can guarantee there are some lazy marketers out there.
Oh, I agree. I'm
And
just
I'm not even accepting myself from that. If I can find the quicker, easier way to do something, fantastic. But it is all of the things that you're talking about. And I think on top of that, even beyond staying power, and staying power is critical, I think it's also vision and a willingness to take the risk. And there is a very real challenge. We know that the CMOs, the door to the CMO's office is revolving, right? We know that. So it's a difficult position. In many ways, a CMO is stuck between a rock and a hard place. And and it's, it's hard to remain committed to innovation in a lot of instances where you've got a target on your back. So there is that very real problem. And yes, they would benefit from the tools and the right kinds of advisors, and somebody to help show them the way and guide them to the promised land. But even at the end of the day, because they are resource constrained and need to allocate those resources against the things they know are going to deliver the nearest term benefit to the brand, which for many organizations simply means the drive sales this week, this month, this quarter. They do, it is very difficult for them. And I don't envy anybody in this position. It's very difficult for them to, you know, to stay the course, but also to, commit to kind of espousing a vision and sticking with it. It's a difficult place to be in, but it's a challenge because at the end of the day, what it means is, as marketers, we end up flitting from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, and never actually having the opportunity to cash in on that thing unless that thing really pops quick. Um, you know,
so so there is an answer, and I will put a word in your mouth. But before I do that, I think just to synthesize, Anne Marie is talking about a changing role and relationship between the brand and consumer, beginning with the fact that we should stop calling them consumers. And then Michael talks about this idea of cooperate and graduate. Why take risks? True. The word is compensation. The word is, if we could reinvent, or not even reinvent, just innovate the way that we go to market, such that a community that is growing and thriving and producing and activating 5, 10, 20, 30 years after that marketer or that agency or those developers have left the building, have left even the company, and yet they're still enjoying the fruits of their labor. This is not a revolutionary idea. This is not anything different to the concept of a residual or a royalty that someone in Hollywood might enjoy or entertain, or musician after the fact. Is it as simple as that?
I don't know. Certainly
I don't know.
right. It's
Answer.
that's one
Headlines
of your
tomorrow.
sound bites. That's one of your sound bites for
I
sure.
don't know.
That'll be next week. That's going to be the one thing you show from this broadcast. I think that there's, I think, potential in that, right? You're right that it's not a new idea, which then gets down to the idea, gets down to so do you need Web3 from a technology standpoint to activate it? Can't we just provide brand residuals or consumer, whatever you want to call them? The same way they've been provided in Hollywood, which is a bit of a weird metaphor because now that whole thing is falling apart, but that's a whole different story. But that's an interesting idea for sure. Is it as simple as that? I think you kind of balance that against we've got people our age even who believe that climate change is not real, and quite frankly couldn't care less because they'll be gone before their children feel the impact. if you don't care enough about the next generation in your own family, are you going to care about what happens inside an organization 20, 30, 40, 50 years after you're out as a chief marketer? I have no idea.
So, I'm thinking, instead of looking back and looking at what didn't work and asking the question, was Web3 just too damn hard? Were there too many steps? I think we know the answer is yes, and amongst other things. The question comes down to, is this in fact groundhog? I'm asking, I think to myself, here I am. I I look to the left and I look to the right, and I realize that I'm back in the ghost town of Second Life. That there aren't many people still around. There aren't many people still flying the flag of Web3. And I question, I'm being honest, I question, I go, am I just that stubborn mule refusing to call time of death? Or is this the second coming of digital? And will we see the phoenix rising from the ashes once again? What do you think, honestly, Greg? Do you think that Web3 is an idea whose time has come, or do you think Web3's time has come and gone, and now it's time for the next big thing?
I mean, is it possible that the answer is both in a way, right? I think
You tell me.
in a way, I mean, I'm not the expert, but but
You are today.
I think it's something of both, right? I think I think that trying to think of how to frame this. I think that the kind of the moment in time that was the Web3, that was Web3 as it was, whatever, 6, 9, 12 months ago, is a time that is gone, right? And that may be very well a good thing, right? Because the hype has died out, and the hype always brings the shucksters, the hucksters, the shameless promoters, the scam artists, the pornographers, right? That's what the hype brings to the table. Yes, it brings brands in as well. That might be good. But it brings a lot of the sort of unsavory garbage into the space. For anything, not just Web3. So we've kind of gone through that moment in time, I hope. It also brings, kind of the, like the true believers, but who are wearing rose tinted glasses and aren't thinking more broadly about what the practical implications are. I think we also saw a period in time where Web3 became a catch-all grab bag for anything that wasn't the old thing, in a way, right? Because it was crypto, and it was blockchain, and it was NFTs, and it was metaverse, and it was dot 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 dot. So it became this grab bag of things that effectively, if everything is Web3, nothing is Web3. So I would hope that as Web3, if Web3 comes out of that cycle and proves to be a viable means of rethinking the internet, the way people connect, the idea of community, even potentially the idea of community capitalism, that it does so in a way that is more focused, that has a more clear definition. I think the other important thing is there was a lot of rhetoric around democratization and ownership and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, to me, in terms of my level of engagement around Web3, it always felt predominantly like two things: technology and economy, right? So it was always, how do we use this technology to create a scenario in which some number of people are going to make a bunch of money on something speculative? It's kind of like that was like the face of Web3. That was the clown's makeup. When really, at the end of the day, it could have been and should have been, and then probably in some degree was, but I don't think that it really caught on this way, a social movement, right? Fundamentally, it's a social movement, not the evolution of technology. The technology may support that movement. But it was like this big messy thing where I think the focus was in the wrong place, and where I think the sort of the gap between perception, or at least vision, and reality was so wide, right? You had the same rich people getting rich all over again, right? It was not, I mean, I don't know how much money you made or lost trading NFTs or buying Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. I know how much money I lost. And I lost that money buying the things that were hyped by people who were making a crap load of money buying those things, right? And you could say, well, it's a timing accident. Of course, you always, the people who get in early get the biggest reward. But that's just a replication of the very same problems of the system that Web3 was claiming to replace, right? So if you're going to replace the old system with a new system that's actually worse than the old system, that's where it becomes
Mm.
problematic. And I know
You
that wasn't the vision, but in practice, that's kind of what it turned into.
Well, maybe we and this really is part of the vision of Alpha Collective that actually says, although I did enjoy my idea of YPO meets the Illuminati, that was too much fun, too much fun. But we get the opportunity if we come together, the best and brightest, or at least aspiring, the people with the most heart and soul, we get an opportunity to form or reform or remake and do this right. And I think inherent, it's funny, it's funny that you actually turn around and said technology and economy, because in my definition of Web3, I talk about shared values, shared ownership, and shared reward. And the shared ownership is blockchain, is technology, shared reward is economy. But the way I've reframed that is purpose, diversity, and loyalty in words and in phrases and in priorities that a blue chip brand not only would understand but desperately would covet and would need. But I like the way you did it, because we just now created that low road and high road. The low road, in terms of what happens when first movers and land grabbers and philanderers come together to combine technology and economy, we end up with people getting ripped off, people getting wrecked,
Yeah.
the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. But if there is a high road and a high ground, then that high road and high ground is about democratization, leveling of playing fields, community capitalism. And I guess the question comes down to, Greg, is this three strikes and we're out? We kind of did not deliver on that with 1.0. We did not deliver on that with 2.0. Even worse, when we look at, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, and us being, passed around and delivered like meat, like data pieces of meat or meat pieces of data. So is this our third and final shot to get it right?
I mean, I don't think it's that simple. I mean, I think there will be other shots to get it right.
You could
Whether
just
we,
answer and say
yeah,
yes.
you want me to say yes?
Well, you said I don't know, so now it comes yes. No, but I do want
But
to hear what you have to say.
no, I do think that I feel like there will be other shots. Whether we muffed this shot, I think is certainly debatable, and I think that might be yes, right? That we kind of we screwed it up before we even got it going. Whether you call it Web3, you call it something else, I think that there is certainly another shot down the road. The question is, will the stars align, so to speak? Will purpose, value, and loyalty, the high road, as you lay it out, kind of, will that take precedence over the low road? And to what extent can we, this is sort of another angle too, is how do we make it easy for people to understand and to get involved with a movement as that movement happens? I mean, it was incredibly difficult to be part of Web3 as a consumer. Forget as a builder, right? But as a consumer, how incredibly hard was it? People, and we know people. I mean, it's happened to us, but I don't consider you or I. There were people who were like rock solid experts in Web3 who understood the technology, who were running projects, who were advising other projects, who still got their wallets hacked, who had their NFTs stolen, who got scammed, who got rugged, who had shit airdropped into their wallet that they accidentally clicked
Yeah,
on, who,
and now
right?
they're AI experts as well
Right.
to
And right now they've
to
moved
add
on and they're
insult
doing
to
something
injury.
else. Right. But the truth is, it was difficult for the best of people, impossible for the
For
average
us, yeah.
person, right? For us, for the average person. So I think that, I think, it's got to somehow, if we're going to have another shot, we've got to find a way to make it simple, and we've got to find a way to kind of define really compelling use cases. I mean, it's obviously a big joke, when people, are like, "Oh, I bought an NFT," and like, somebody like, "Oh, I screenshotted your NFT. Now I own it too," right? And that, of course, misses the whole point. And this thing you're showing here, right? But it misses the point. But the value of owning a digital asset verifiably, with a blockchain record, didn't make sense to the average person, because that asset wasn't an asset anybody cared to own, right? If the initial blockchain use case was, this is going to be the mortgage to your house, right, that might have been a totally different story. We're digitizing mortgages on the blockchain and we can prove provenance and ownership, and like, that might have been a different thing, because people go, "Oh, I get it, I own a house. Instead of a piece of paper that I've lost in my filing cabinet, I need to, I have this digital record." So it's, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. I saw Anne Marie flash something about,
She said the
the
tools are
tools are
flawed. It's
flawed. It's
almost
almost impossible not to get hacked, right? Why, for all of the time and energy, and let's be clear, money, right? Sandhill Road was pouring money into blockchain companies and Web3 companies. To this very day, so much of the technology is tape and band-aids and popsicle sticks, right? It's all, it's so easy to get hacked. Everything is broken, nothing works right, it's difficult, it's kludgy, it's buggy. How can that be, with the amount of money some of these companies took, that they still don't have a system that's reliable, that's got uptime, where there's a
Let's see.
standard level of of availability? It's like, what the
I
hell
see
is going on?
a new book from Greg Verdino, Band-Aids and Popsicle Sticks. I love that. I've never heard. I mean, I've heard of duct tape and chicken wire, but not popsicle sticks. Greg, let me ask you this question, because in a partnership, um, well, it helps when what one side needs, the other side has, and what the other side needs, the first side has. So let me ask you two questions, which are very much connected. Does does what does do does Web3 need brands, the big brands, and do big brands need Web3? I feel that this is a $1 billion question, because I'm proceeding on the assumption that Web3 needs the next billion brand dollars, that Web3 needs the brand bullies, as I call them, to chase out and clean up Times Square. So, from your perspective, I'll ask the question again: does Web3 need the big brands, and do the big brands need Web3?
So I think I would agree with your assessment that Web3, in a sense at least, needs big brands. And it's less about big brand dollars and more about the communities that big brands, and I'm using that word loosely, but the communities that big brands bring to the table. In order to scale Web3, or anything really, you need people walking in the door. And big brands have, you can argue whether they're good, strong relationships, weak relationships. It depends on the brand. But big brands have relationships with lots of people and an ability to spend the money when they need to and create compelling messages when they have to get in front of those people and convince them to take action, right? A brand is about making culture change. They're a reflection of the culture, but they drive the culture as well. When a brand embraces something like Web3 or Web2 or Second Life or whatever, that brand has an incredible I think has a lot of potential to bring brands, people to the table. But they've got to believe in it. They've got to be committed to it. They have to show leadership. They have to stick with it, and not have it just be sort of a campaign fireworks crickets, as you like to say, kind of blip on the radar. Um, do brands need Web3? And I think that comes down to a fundamental question of to what extent can brands activate and monetize communities in a real, authentic way without Web3? And I feel like, you know what I mean? So I feel like brands could theoretically, if they chose to, do that without Web3. So I think Web3 needs to make the argument that there is something new and different and compelling that Web3 brings to the table that brands otherwise could not have done on their own. It's not scale, it's not technology. It could be mindset, it could be ethos, it could be access to creators and their creativity. But I think that Web3 probably needs to sharpen the tip of its spear,
Mm.
whatever that marketing pitch is, because it hasn't landed with consumers, and it hasn't really landed with companies in a big way. Certainly there are some brands who have come to the table. They're doing things and they're sticking with it. But for every Starbucks, you have you have a Salesforce. For every Adidas, you have a Nike. It's like so like some brands like you're too in and out. And I think that it's almost as if the pitch to brands was the same as the pitch to consumers when Web3 was in its big hype cycle, which was, here's an opportunity to make a crap load of money really quick. Right. So Adidas made whatever it was, $22 million with an M, right? $22 million in an afternoon, but could barely fulfill the shipment of sweatshirts. I don't understand how that happened. With $22 million, I could certainly ship sweatshirts. They're an apparel manufacturer. They still couldn't ship sweatshirts, right? But who else benefited from that $22 million? It's a great windfall for a brand. But bots bought all of the NFTs in the first couple of seconds of trading.
Well, I think you've actually touched on something which is very it's elegant, it's eloquent, it's succinct, which is surprising for you and me talking. But it's almost a very simple litmus test or rubric, which is, could this have been done without Web3? That's the question. That is the question. Now, if you want to add one level, you can actually go with a very simple rubric on top of that, which is better, cheaper, faster. Pick two, right? And so it makes me think back to the days of digital, which is when we would say, from the pushback of no one's ever going to order, a car online. No one's ever going to order food online. No one's ever going to order clothing online. But before that was this idea of, well, wait a second, I'm in my gown. It's 10:30 p.m. My gown and slippers. Can you imagine me in my gown and
In your
slippers?
ball gown.
Yeah, exactly. My ball gown. It's 10:30 at night. The stores are closed. I now have the ability to not only order whatever I want, get the information that I need, not have to encounter a rude, uneducated, ignorant salesperson, not have to deal with the fact that there are, that there isn't inventory or stock available. Suddenly things start to fall into place. So you have two ways to look at that. One is this idea of going back to the use cases, going back to follow the consumer, the customer, the human being. As David Ogilvy once said, do not insult the consumer. She is your wife. Apparently, he didn't realize that he would have been canceled, damn it. But I'm going down too much of a rabbit hole. But this is the point. Follow the consumer. He or she or they will not lead you astray. Two is find the use case. And even if you have to come in on the better, cheaper, faster angle and answer the question, could this have been done better, cheaper, and or faster without Web3?
Yeah. And I think also acknowledge that things take time. To build on your example of, your examples of e-commerce, right? You know, e-commerce dates back to when? I mean, 2004, 2005 in a real way, maybe even before that. Um, but it wasn't until 2019 when it really kind of the switch flipped, or 2020 really with COVID-19 when the switch flipped. I mean, even today, the vast majority of retail is still brick and mortar. But it took quite a while to get from, the first book sold on Amazon or whatever to a point where the majority of people have made an online purchase. It doesn't happen overnight. And
I think that's a great point, to take digital and e-com all the way to 2020. Greg, in the time we have left, let's talk about AI.
mhm.
Initially, I was, like I was like, the next bright and shiny object, the next big thing, the next rocket ship to the moon, Chat GPT, and then starting to see some cracks already, and rise of competitors, and almost this. I mean, amidst everything, we even had the rise and fall, or the rise and stagnation of threads. um, you're focusing on AI, and one thing I will always do is focus on what you're focusing on, because you apply a strategic lens, and there's no hype associated with the way that you look and the way that you put frameworks together. What can we in Web3 learn from AI in terms of what AI has done right, and or by definition what we haven't? What are you seeing right now that AI, where AI is going, that Web3 can in fact learn from and benefit from?
Okay. So, I mean, first of all, despite the fact that ChatGPT made it, made AI a household name, put it on the radar for everybody, 100 million people all of a sudden, practically overnight, playing around with generative AI. Um, AI has been around for a very long time, right? So that's
Right.
another kind of, 60 years to an overnight success, right? It's been, a field of research since what, the 1950s. But even if you look at marketing specifically, AI has been embedded into the marketing stack for a couple of decades now already. Not generative AI, of course, but all of AI. Um, the you know so that's one thing, is that it's an evolution of something that we are already familiar with in a way. We're all using AI in our lives and our work, in ways sometimes we don't know. That kind of brings me to the next thing, is that it's a technology that has already in many ways become invisible. You don't think about the fact that you're engaging with AI when you use Google Maps, or when you do a Google search, or when you use Waze, or you use Spotify or Netflix to pick your next bingeable series, right? You're just using it. Nobody's calling it out to you, and you don't have to struggle to make the technology work. It just works. So that's another thing, is this idea of when technology becomes invisible, it becomes popular, it becomes easy, it becomes obvious, it just becomes part of the way we live. And Web3 never got there. So I think in that regard, investing in the technology and making it easy is vital. When ChatGPT hit and ushered in this new wave of sort of consumerized generative AI, think about how easy that was, right? They put a free tool in everybody's hands. And again, you can argue about, is its output good? What's the issue with hallucination? Where did the data come from? Are you trouncing on intellectual property rights? Is this good for the environment? What about the people in developing nations who had to sit and do all of the cleanup of the data and look at like bestiality and child porn and stuff to get it out of the system, right? There's all of that stuff, that ugly stuff on the back end. But to the typical user, it was, I'm having a conversation with my computer. And it was so easy and it was so simple. And you could immediately, by putting your fingers on the keys, you could feel what the practical application could be in your life or your work. And I think that's another lesson, that ease, that simplicity, that obvious application to the typical user. Um, I think, in a weird way, Silicon Valley had had a couple of happy hype cycles, right? They had crypto, they had NFTs, they had metaverse. Um, when, of course, predictably, to your point, all of that dies down. Now, surprise, surprise, OpenAI releases this next generation generative AI tool that's going to blow everybody's mind. We're back in the hype cycle. And that's no accident, I'm sure, in terms of the timing of it. But, what's interesting to me is that with generative AI, it's both like a happy and sort of and an angry or hype cycle. Because even the downsides, whether you look at the harms, the real harms, the bias, the discrimination, the exploitation of workers, the use of resources, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You look at the real harms, or you look at the so-called existential threats. Is a godlike machine going to eradicate humanity? And somehow Sam Altman in particular, but all of the CEOs and all of the pundits and all of the AI researchers, but Sam Altman in particular, goes on a Regulate Me roadshow to convince the oldest and most out of touch people in the world, senators and politicians in other countries, that they need to regulate him or the world is going to end. And he has no way to stop it from happening. Right, which is a whole bunch of crap, right? That's like the weakling out in the street saying, hold me back, I'm gonna kill him, right? It's like, it's like, okay, Sam, that's crap. But even that, playing into the negative cycle, became just a phenomenal marketing machine, right? I don't know that that's good or bad, but Web3 never played into that negativity and turned it into a positive. That's for sure. It's almost like, especially OpenAI, have crafted the ultimate marketing story. Even when the marketing story sounds like it could result in job loss and the end of humanity, blah, 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 which is a load of crap. But, it's interesting that they
Not
just they have such a clear and definitive and distinctive marketing narrative in the marketplace that it's impossible not to get drawn along into that in one way or another.
Well, I was going to say, I kind of like the line of CMOs as dashboards. That one, I had a lot of fun with prompts on Midjourney trying to say, what if the CMO is like Tron? CMO has now become a dashboard. Almost
Yeah.
like in Superman 2, kind of behind the mirror. But there was gold. There was gold, Jerry, in those comments. This idea
Full
of
fold.
defining the elevator pitch, the marketing narrative. I actually just wrote the word auto magically, right? This is what we're talking about. You push a button and auto magically something amazing, game changing, transformative happens. And that might be Web3's moment, learning from AI. I do want to ask you one more question, actually two. One of them is, there are days when I think I'm just gonna, throw in the towel, wave the white flag, and go and hang out in Sandbox with no one, or Decentraland. Is it worth? I'm just going to ask you the question. Just, is it worth pursuing? Is Web3 worth pursuing, Greg? In your opinion, should I keep going?
I think you're too far into it now to give up. I think it's become part of
I
your.
just did a whole session on when digging oneself into a hole, the best thing to do is to stop digging.
I think that. I guess I'm trying to think. I was like, I feel like now I've got to give you life advice or I'm like your business coach or something. Um,
Don't send me an
you know,
invoice. Send it in Linden dollars.
but I think
I
that
don't need your
there
advice.
is.
Anne Marie just said no
Yeah,
turning
she said
back
no
now,
turning
Joe.
back, which I said as well in like a less eloquent way. But I think that I think there is something meaningful in the ethos, whether that materializes as a technological step change or not is almost, in my opinion, immaterial. If I were a builder, if I was involved with blockchain, if I had NFT projects or whatever, I would probably say something different and feel differently. But I think that the ethos is worth preserving and maintaining. I think that as I think about Alpha Collective, I think keeping the conversation going in a productive way is important, whether that leads to greater adoption of Web3 or it opens minds towards sort of new ways to think about innovation and opportunity and the way the world is changing. I think it's still a worthwhile mission. So keep on keeping on, I would say.
I like that. I mean, I will, because, as I said, there's Anne-Marie just said there's no going back now. And besides, there was a day when we used to conduct our status meetings in Second Life. We were quite strategic as well. We were sneaky. We were in the boardroom. People could teleport into the office and actually see us sitting down having a status meeting. They couldn't hear us, but we were on Skype, or we were talking to one another. And at times we would put certain things onto our slides, onto our actual agenda, so people could look in and go, that's interesting. I wonder what that's going to look like. We were able to do some amazing things. And I just wonder where we would have been had we stayed the course. Greg, where do you think we'd be if we'd stayed the course? I'm not talking about Crayon or Crayonville, but I'm saying, have you ever thought, where would virtual worlds, where would Second Life, where would augmented and virtual reality be? Where would Web3 be had we stayed the course?
I mean, I think the simple answer is anytime you stay the course, you run the chance that it actually takes you somewhere. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, the bottom line, right? Is, I don't know, to what extent, let's say, Second Life was an idea before its time, and probably in some ways it was, and whether it would have over time achieved the kind of scale people were hoping to see when Mr. Zuckerberg changed the name of his company to Meta. Um, but I certainly think if more, I would say, thinkers and doers had stayed with whatever it was, right? Whether it was Second Life or the metaverse or Web3 or dot, dot, dot. I think when you have the brains drain out of a space, and when the money leaves, and when the people who actually do stuff in that space kind of start writing, whatever, LinkedIn, carousels about prompt engineering or what, whatever happens, that's detrimental to a space. So I think having that sort of staying power and staying the course would have certainly made today's conversation very different. And I think the sort of the landscape we'd be working in would be somewhat different. I don't know that we would it would be a whole like sea change. But I think the most important thing is, maybe not the most important thing, but I look at Second Life, and then I look at, say, the metaverse hype cycle that happened whenever that was, right? And you could look at, I actually had somebody reach out to me. I feel like now I sound like you because I'm like self-referential talking about crap that happened to me that nobody cares about. But I actually had somebody reach out to me when the metaverse hype cycle was at its absolute peak, and they had Googled something like, marketing principles for the metaverse. And they came across an article I had written in the Second Life hype cycle when I was at Digitas, I think, where I laid out a handful of key principles. They weren't rocket science. They were the kind of things we were talking about earlier in terms of respecting the community, joining the community, working with the community, being authentic, actually taking the time to understand, like, know the neighbors and whatever. And I had these handful of principles and I laid them out. And he said he read the article. He's like, wow, that's exactly right. That makes sense to me. And then he noticed after he read it that the article was 15 years old. And he reached out to me, was like, how the hell did you know 15 years ago? And I was like, it's been the same thing over and over and over and over again. So I think one of the main things that would be different, or would have been different, in that metaverse cycle had we stayed the course, forget about would it have been big or would it have mainstream? Would we all be wearing goggles now? But the lessons that we learned would have been retained and shared. Because what happened, of course, is the same mistakes brands made in Second Life. Different brands with different marketers, a different generation of practitioners made the same exact mistakes again.
Groundhog
And
Day, Groundhog Day in the metaverse. Greg, let me tell you, everything was spot on in that response, except you didn't tell them the truth. I learned it all from Joseph Jaffe.
that
and
is true.
join the
I
conversation.
thought that went without saying.
Well, I did ask you what you wanted to promote, and you said your undying love for Joseph Jaffe. So you just did that, but you have a new company, and I would love for you to tell the world, because there are, when last I
At
checked,
least three people.
6.7 million people watching right now, or they will when the word gets out. When Michael Donnelly says, "Hey, marketers, you've got to be watching these two futurists from Back to the Future, predicting things like authenticity and community and decency and kindness." And I'll stop there. Donnelly's probably gone back to work. Tell us about the new
I should hope
company.
so. So the new company is called Cognitive Path, and I mean, we're a marketing AI consultancy, but I think in a nutshell, what matters about that is, um, there are certainly plenty of AI consultants these days, but from my perspective, a lot of what's happening in the world of generative AI kind of falls into this category of sort of random acts of Chat GPT. These technologies are making their way inside marketing organizations, a lot of times without any governance, no sanctions, no guardrails, no sense of what the proper use cases are, no roadmap, no strategy, no idea of how to scale these things beyond a pilot or a sort of a small scale test, right? So my objective really is to provide the kinds of counsel and guidance and advisory that Joe, you and I have always provided for brands to kind of ground any actions they take and decisions they make around how generative AI can be integrated into marketing workflows and processes and strategies actually has a strategic grounding. I always like to liken it, because I have such a big head, to kind of like a McKinsey for generative AI, but without the price tag. There we go.
Well, let me tell you something. Under this big tent, everyone is welcome. This is a tent for diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. There are no clowns under this tent. Do not be fooled by the music. There were no clowns back in the day when we used to run Coffee with Crayon every Tuesday morning at 8, I believe. And now I'm doing the Collective Cafe Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. in Discord and Clubhouse. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But one thing is constant. If you want to get sage, sound, strategic advice from someone who's been around, who will be around, and who will not lead you astray, call me. And if I'm busy, call Greg Verdino and his new company. Greg, did we hit the 17 questions that you asked, that you sent to me in the Google Doc?
This is supposed to be a natural, authentic conversation, Joe.
Bad news, Michael Donnelly was listening the whole time. He said, "Thank you for sharing your passion, wisdom, and experiences now and over the last couple of decades. All the best." Where you going, Donnelly? Our work is just beginning. Our work is just beginning. This fills me with a lot of hope, which is, on one hand, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But the other is the fact that keep going, as you said. Stick around. If you stick around long enough, and you put in the hours, you put in the reps, you put in the hard work. You never know. You never know. You might just avoid being pelted with genitalia. Is that a good way to end?
I think that's a perfect way to end.
This has been the Verdino and Jaffe Show, and we will be back in weeks to come with yet another Alpha Beta Talk speaker. Take care, everyone.